Hey everybody, this is Aubrey Chaves from Faith Matters. For today's episode, we're doing something a little bit different. With all of the exciting things happening at Faith Matters, we thought that it would be a good time to take a step back and take stock of what we've done and share more about where we're going. We also take some time to discuss the questions about Faith Matters that we hear most often and share more about our purpose and approach. Tim and I were joined by one of Faith Matters founders, Bill Turnbull, as well as Faith Matters' new executive director, Zach Davis, who will be a voice that you'll continue to hear on the podcast. We want to send all of you a huge thank you, as always, for listening and for supporting us. And with that, we'll jump right in.
All right. Well, I am sitting here with a group of remarkable people. Aubrey, my wife, good to see you. And also Bill Turnbull and Zach Davis. Hey, guys.
Hey, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Aubrey.
It's good to be with all of you. Today, we're going to have a conversation that should be a lot of fun. It's going to be maybe more free-flowing than usual. You, as listeners, you may notice that we don't have everyone here is part of the Faith Matters team. This is the first time that we've done this, and we thought that we would take advantage of this this moment that we're all together to talk about where Faith Matters has come from and what we're doing and where it's going. That sound good to everybody?
Yeah, sounds fun.
Yeah, I think it should be. We think that a good place to start, maybe, Bill, is actually with you. You were among the original group of Faith Matters founders, and that can't be said about anybody else around this table. And we were noting, interestingly, that neither Aubrey nor I, despite our involvement over the past several years, have heard the real origin story of where Faith Matters came to be. So could you give us a little bit of that just background for our own enlightenment?
Yeah, maybe it's, since COVID, we all have a different sense of chronology now. So
yes.
Like I might.
Time is mostly meaningless at this point.
Yeah. Space and time are just constructs, so we're going to flow into something.
Exactly.
So, well, let me, I would say that I've always wished, so if I go back far enough when I was like, I don't know, Zach's age, and just, well, actually during my college experience, I had been so well served by the church in my life. Like just, I encountered God in powerful ways in my youth, and was led to serve a mission and marry an amazing person, and all in this like the vision that my faith created for me was like really, really helpful. And so I have a very, very strong commitment, as you guys know, because we've spent a lot of time hanging out and talking. But I think you know how deep my commitment to the faith goes, and I feel like it's continues to transform me and fuel that transformation. I also am aware that when I reached a certain point, and it was really during my college years, my university years at BYU. My faith and the worldview that it provided me began feeling a little small. I was encountering a much broader world, even on my mission. As you're a missionary, I'm in Italy and I loved my mission there, but you encounter people in a certain way, and you're not really opening yourself up. You're not really taught to open yourself up to experience their world maybe the way they do, and to really look at what our faith's place in the world is. So, as I began to study, world history, I was interested in everything. And my university days were full of, I was just curious about everything. And I just got to a point where I was wondering how my faith, my worldview could really accommodate what I was seeing in the world. Does that sound familiar at all to you guys?
Yes. Now, I'm wondering, though, like, what's sort of coming up for me is...
Specifically what?
Well, no, it's more like, are you sort of euphemizing what we would, in this last decade, would call faith crisis? Or is that not what you're saying?
I mean, I think eventually it led to some questions about, what truth claims and historical things that I had to deal with in a different way, right? I think right now, at this point of time in the church right now, we are in a very difficult and disruptive period.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. We're seeing it. And so I experienced like maybe the leading edge of that when I was very young, right? And so so two things happened. First thing, I became very nourished in ways by people outside of our tradition, people, practices, ideas. So the excitement that I maybe was beginning to lose for my own faith, I was beginning to find in other places, which was really kind of an expansive experience for me. It helped me identify to a much greater extent with people outside of our tradition and people in other cultures and people who look at the world in different ways. But it also at the cost maybe of maybe a full. I was never disengaged with the church. I always loved the church and what it did for my life. But I'm very familiar with that experience when you're sitting in church and like, is anybody asking the same questions?
Right.
Or like, are we still going to just kind of repeat these same formulas and keep doing that? And so, yeah.
Well, because potentially the church back then was even, the way I imagine it, this is sort of an era where, Bruce R. McConkey's at the height of his powers. Like, I imagine that church that I didn't really experience.
How old do you think I am?
Okay, sorry.
No, but you're like not far from it. Like I had a copy of Mormon Doctrine.
Yes.
Like on my mission, and when I have to say though, I got to a point in my life where that book became distasteful to me. Yeah. Because the thing about Mormon Doctrine, the thing about the project of the church, we were doing a lot of telling people what to think. And in that book, Bruce McConkie tells you about what to think about every single thing. And there's a good reason why we jettisoned that book and it's not in print anymore. It's not a healthy thing to do. But he was also feeding like something that people, there was a demand for that kind of thing, right? And I come from that era when there was a demand for that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Which I imagine to be a very sort of constrictive environment. Yeah. And potentially that if you were public in any way with this type of thinking, that you might have received significant pushback. Or is that not right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, sure. I mean, everybody experiences that. Like you asked that question, like it feels like you've stepped over some boundary somewhere. Yeah. So I had an experience. Can I just share this when I was?
By all means.
I think this was in around 1990. This was a formative experience for me. So we moved into a new ward, and this was in Idaho. And we had this like really interesting mix of people in this ward. Some real like genuine intellectuals. Even today, some of the brightest people that I've known, and they had caused a little bit of a tumult in the ward because they wanted to talk about things that the ward was not comfortable talking about, right? And so it was like one of those. We moved in this ward and this dynamic already existed, and the bishop had actually disinvited them to participate in Sunday school.
Oh,
whoa!
In gospel doctrine, right? So that was like they were sort of made pariahs in their ward, and about this time that bishop got released, and he was just like dealing with pushback from members. He didn't know really how to deal with this. So he says, would you guys just mind just like not coming to Sunday school? Because it's just, I'm having to deal with too much. And I sympathize with him. But that's not the right way to handle it. So the next bishop happened to be my attorney. He was called to be bishop. And he came to me, and we didn't know each other that well, but he'd help me set up some businesses. He said he knew enough. He said, I guess he sensed. He said, would you like to teach a Sunday school class for these people? So what we did is like we created this Sunday school class that was, and all we talked about is the fundamental principles of the gospel, and but in really rich ways. But we also said like any question, you can bring any question, but let's all be sensitive to what spirit that question brings. Like sometimes we need to be disrupted, and it's like it's uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable in a good way. And sometimes it's coming out of anger or something like that, and can we all just be sensitive to that? So we had this like really rich experience, and eventually the class grew. We had defectors from the other gospel doctrine class. Like we just given this one classroom, the standard LDS meeting house classroom, and it kind of was bursting at the seams at some point. But I think that taught me that there is a way to honestly approach real questions, that in a real faithful way. So, as I always had my eyes out for maybe somebody that was doing that, right? The church needs to accommodate the believer that's just joined and just needs to become a disciple and learn those those steps. And like, so the church can't really like create what we created in that Sunday school class. And so who's going to do that? The fact is we don't live in a world where everything comes from the top down, right? There's conversations happening everywhere. I wanted to create a space. My vision was like to create a space that I would have loved to have when I was your age. Mm-hmm. That was like the broad intention, where you can like really explore the power of our faith and also talk about like ask hard questions and not like shy away from them, and then just kind of realize that they're hard, and maybe that's where we're supposed to be transforming, so I guess you use this term, David Brooks' term, like the edge of insight, mm-hmm. right? I know you like, so I'm just, can I get you to share your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, I can say that I think it's that, and maybe this is an appropriate time for Aubrey and I to talk a little bit about how we got involved. Yeah. But what drew us to Faith Matters was very much the vision that you just painted. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were searching for space, the same type of space that you were searching for. I think our faith crisis was more the stereotypical faith crisis, that was brought on by the internet and just new information that we felt like we had never experienced, and that sort of like throwing us for a loop, Yeah. Coming across the work of Terryl Givens was instrumental in sort of helping us, stick around at least long enough to feel like we could figure something out. I think until we encountered Faith Matters, what we were searching for really was certainty. Like, I felt like we were going to stay in long enough to know if, quote unquote, the church was true or it was not true. And then, if we found out once and for all that it was true, then we would stay. And if we found out once and for all that it wasn't true, and for listeners, I'm air quoting a lot here, yeah. Then we would leave. And I think Faith Matters reframed that entire paradigm for us. It gave us values in faith and even in religion outside of belief and knowledge. It sort of reoriented us in terms of real connection to the divine and to our fellow human beings. But sort of necessarily that placed us not in the center of the church anymore, because that, I think at the center of the church, there are really valid and honorable values that are there, like belief and like loyalty and duty. But with the paradigm that we sort of took on in those years, we were sort of by default not in that center anymore. And this idea of the edge of insight started to really resonate with us. Maybe I should read a paragraph here from David Brooks. This was published in 2016, and he credits Richard Rohr for the original idea. Both of those articles are easily Googleable. But he says, a person at the edge of insight can be the strongest reformer. This person has the loyalty of a faithful insider, but the judgment of the critical outsider. Martin Luther King Jr. had an authentic inner experience of what it meant to be an American. This love allowed him to critique America from the values he learned from America. He could be utterly relentless in bringing America back closer to herself, precisely because his devotion to American ideals was so fervent. Aubrey, I feel like you need to chime in here.
This is super interesting, Phil, because I really haven't ever heard how this all started, and what you're describing is exactly the thing that we weren't just searching for, like we were desperate for. Like when you talk about the classroom bursting at the seams, like we were bursting at the seams. Like our I know a lot of people don't resonate with the term faith crisis, but for us that was the word. Like our world was falling apart. And so Terryl is the first person that I ever heard who had a real piece about the uncertainty, and we were just so hungry to hear more people model this way of being in the world, this way of having faith without and not certainty, because up until that point I use those words interchangeably, like or I use certainty and faith interchangeably. Like the stronger your faith, the more certain you were. And so it was really destabilizing to start being honest with myself about questions, because it felt like what it meant is I didn't have faith. And so there was so much shame that I would go to church in just so much pain, because it felt very inauthentic. I felt like we were hiding this secret, which was that we didn't have a testimony. Like we did not have testimonies, and it was terrifying. And that was the only way I could describe the experience that I was having. And even though I think the whole experience happened because we had the best of intentions, like we were so committed that it was in an effort to learn more and to understand more and to be, I read, like really got into church history out of the most honest belief that I could desensitize myself to like the pain of it all. Like if I could read everything I could find about polygamy, it wouldn't hurt so much. And then I would be able to see God's hand. And like the opposite happened, like everything fell apart. And so hearing Terryl and Richard Bushman was another of those very first few voices in Fiona, that they knew all of the hardest parts of the history, and they were still they were staying, and they were growing and finding value. And it didn't come from this place of absolutely knowing that the church was true in the way that I had always believed I was supposed to know. They were there and finding value because of the hard things, because they were wrestling with all of the hard things. And so out of desperation, we were reaching for what Faith Matters became. And it was, Thomas in a really recent conversation said that there's a way that sincere seeking will, let's see, how did he put it? Like there's a way that way leads to way if there's real sincere searching. And that is exactly what it felt like. It was out of desperation that we sort of found ourselves in these circles over and over again with the same people who kept resonating with that energy of just like wrestling being a good thing and not a shameful thing. And that's something that I hadn't ever heard articulated or experienced before. And it was such a different kind of relief. Up until that point, I think we were reaching for apologetics or anything that would dispel the dissonance. And so a lot of times that looks like, just give me an easy answer, because then I'll stop having to feel how uncomfortable this is. And this was a new kind of peace. It was a peace inside all of the dissonance, and I'd never experienced that before. And so it felt like the first place that we could really rest inside all of our questions.
And can I just say, like, what you just said really resonates with what David Brooks said here. Like, this love allowed him to critique America from the values he learned from America. And like, I feel like you're describing like struggling with what you were encountering within quote unquote Mormonism because of the values that you learned from Mormonism in a very healthy, first half of life that said honesty is important, equality is important, love is important. And the dissonance that you're describing is saying, wait a second, I'm learning things that don't look like those values that I have deeply embedded in me because of my religious upbringing. And how do I deal with that?
Yeah.
I think there's, and by the way, you mentioned like there are apologetics organizations that like basically their job is to play defense, and I think they serve an admirable role, probably a necessary role. That's not what we do, though. That's not the enterprise that I'm interested in. I feel like we play offense at Faith Matters. We're confident enough in the truths that the gospel affords us that we can also look at like that we can take those to the world, and we can also look at like what work we still have to do. And so we have something at Faith Matters that we call the Gottman ratio. That derives from John and Julie Gottman, the really outstanding marriage and family researchers. And I read a book, and he had this ratio. It says if you want to be they found in all of their clinical work that if they're sitting across the table from a couple, and in their interactions, they weren't saying 5 positive things for each critical thing, at least 5, right? That was like there's a breaking point below 5. That the marriage was probably, that relationship was probably going to end, Well, so it's an act of love actually to affirm and to be positive toward your community of faith. I consider like my relationship with the church a relationship. And so I think, why wouldn't those same why wouldn't those same principles apply? And so we broadly sort of try to apply this Gottman ratio and Faith Matters. We better see, if we're not saying at least 5 positive things for every negative thing, we're probably entering into a toxic relationship, even though you don't know it. Yeah. It's really, really easy to scan what you see in your activity or experience in the church and scan for negative things, and you can come up with all kinds of them. So but we can also train ourselves to scan for, things that are really enriching and helpful.
Yeah.
So we try to do that. But that said, there's still that one, like 5-1, right? It's not 5-0. And so like, if that's called denial, right? So one is a loving relationship and another is like living in denial, and so we try to strike that balance as best we can. We're probably not perfect.
Well, okay. I have an interesting idea, Zach.
Well, I was going to say,
could you give us some like really honest feedback on if we're doing that?
Yeah.
As someone that was external to Faith Matters until a few months ago, I'm curious, and who went through the painstaking, I will say, work of listening to every single Faith Matters podcast. And I apologize just for so many things, but thank you for doing that. So I'd be curious, like having recently done that, like are we sticking to the Gottman ratio? What was your sort of perspective going through that catalog of work?
Yeah, to me, it was that forward-looking spirit that I felt about Faith Matters that drew me so much. I also, in my 20s, went through a faith crisis, very painful. And I don't know why, but I did find within myself reasons to stay. I started to think of faith more like a commitment than an internal assertion of belief. But about a year ago or more, though I was active, I wouldn't say I was growing spiritually. I didn't feel like I was moving forward. I felt like I'd found equilibrium. I'd found a way to endure, but I wasn't growing spiritually. But I started to feel that hunger for this. And one of the things that I had found so inspiring is that I was living in Boston, and there's a historian there named Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, and she and I had been hosting these monthly conversations, and we called them Second Sunday. And the idea was that they could be maybe a little bit like your Sunday school, a space to explore any question with depth, with curiosity. And one of the things—
That's an extraordinary conversation partner you managed to look into. You might tell like how that. So you were maybe a little bit more about why you were in Boston, and a tiny bit about your background, because it's super interesting.
Yeah, I moved to Boston in 2012, and I was really interested in using new technologies to teach people about the humanities, books and culture and philosophy and art. So I got involved at Harvard making online courses in the humanities. And the first course that I got assigned in this new job was with someone I'd never heard of, Laurel Ulrich.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And they assigned her to me because they'd heard I was Mormon and they knew she was Mormon. So like, oh, obviously you guys should fit together. So she was in my ward, and we started to get to know each other. And while we were waiting for a video shoot in the summer sun, we started thinking about having this conversation series at her house in Cambridge. So we started doing this, and one of the lessons that she would teach in her responses and in her conversation was that all of us as members are responsible for the church. And she really resisted this idea that you just wait for somebody else to make the church the way you want it. And so over and over, I ended up developing this kind of critique of a franchise model, where somebody just prints out the same thing, and rather that all of us are involved in this. And Clayton Christensen was also a mentor and somebody that all of us in New England looked to. And he also would talk about how, primary and Relief Society and all these different programs, they came from the membership, and they were answering God's call for us to make the restoration not a one-time event, but an unfolding event. So, about a year ago, though, I was just feeling this stronger desire to grow spiritually and not just be static. And I met with Spencer Fluman, and he said, you really need to learn about Bill Turnbull and what Faith Matters is doing. And so I started listening, and right off the bat, the conversations that had been occurring with Tom Christofferson and Thomas McConkie and Terryl and Patrick Mason, it was so different than what I'd really encountered before. And it had a very joyful and positive, forward-looking spirit.
You said in your comments, like Laurel said something about making the church the way you want it. And I think so. That could be heard. You could hear that a couple of different ways, right? I think we have gotten into a really bad habit of looking at the church as this institution headquartered at, whatever that address is of the church office building, And we have begun to, I don't think Joseph Smith in his day, in the early days of the church, they didn't think of the church that way. I think they literally thought of the church as this thing that they were building together. And it was like this relationship that they enjoyed together, right? That was the church. Now we look at it like as an institution with a particular message. I think we're at that point where we need to start looking at the church as us again, right? Which does not mean that I get to make the church the way I want it, but it does mean I can express it in a particular way and live it in a particular way. And I'm not insisting, I'm not saying that my way is the way. I don't think it is. I think Faith Matters is going to appeal, it has a particular flavor to it and a spirit to it that's going to appeal to, what we do is going to appeal to a certain segment of people, and it won't appeal to some others, right? And I'm fine with that. I'm absolutely 100% fine with that. And we don't have this goal of reforming the church. Some people wonder if we're this progressive organization. And would you guys call me progressive? I don't know.
No.
I know you.
I know you'd get very mad at me if I called you progressive.
I'm just, to me, progressive means those are people who know they're already there and they're just waiting for everybody to catch up to them, right? They know where this is going to go, right? And I genuinely, in a lot of these questions, I genuinely don't know. But I do know we need to struggle through some of these things and figure it out. And we all need to be involved in this. If we are involved as a community in addressing some of these most difficult things, then we will ultimately, we will resolve it. But we have to take the moral responsibility to do that. So I'm sorry, that was just when I heard that, I thought, I think it's really important that we change our language around what we mean by church.
Yeah.
The church. Okay. And which is not to disrespect the leadership of the church, which you guys know I have a very high regard for. But we also, we need to think of what is our responsibility. We need to start thinking of the church as the body of Christ, as a community of believers, and quit making the church an object outside of us.
Yeah.
It's not an object outside of us. We have to be this thing. We have to be the church.
Yeah.
That seems really important.
Well,
yeah.
And when you say this too, it seems like a good time to bring up that you've always insisted, and I have adopted, I think, based on your mentorship, that the word we're looking for is expansive. And that's meant a lot to me. And to me, and it may mean something different to me than it means to everyone at this table, but to me, expansive means embracing ideas that are good and true and beautiful, sort of regardless of where they come from. And sometimes they may align with traditionally conservative values, or they may align with some traditionally progressive values. But I hope more often they represent maybe a third way that doesn't fit into any particular ideological rut. And that through honest exploration with other people of good faith, we can unify around something that's a little bit different, but that is truly resonant.
Yeah.
That's what I sort of take to mean as expansive. And I hope Faith Matters is that, rather than, like you said, rather than conservative or progressive. Like, I would love for it to be sort of outside that ideological spectrum.
Frames. Yeah.
Something, Bill, that you've always challenged us to do in conversation is ask ourselves if the conversation is opening up onto something else, or if it's constricting. And that has been the most dependable litmus test for me, because there's something about having the singular right answer that does feel like it closes something. Even if you are positive that you have the only right answer, it feels smaller and it feels divisive. And there is something that really resonates and gives you that soul swelling and sprouting and growing feeling when it opens up. And I think expansive is the word for that. And that's something we're always looking for every difficult conversation that we have. That's the energy we're trying to find. And the guests, and maybe we can talk about the advisory board right now for a second, but we are constantly searching for people who are doing that in their field. And I think they have so much to do with why Faith Matters is what it is.
Yeah, I see that in you guys. I see that, the fruits of that in your lives. And I think we've like teaching each other on this journey, right? But if there are two more, like, you embody that idea of expansiveness in like this beautiful way. And I mean, the fact that we met you and that Zach has now come into our orbit. But by the way, I should say, this is my part of the story. If I talk to the other co-founders, which my wife's not here, well, there's only one chair, and I'm like representing my brother David and Kristen, his wife. We've all been David and Kristen and Susan and I have been on this journey for a long time, right? We've been confidants and we've had lots of late night conversations over the years. So this is they're very much partners in what we're doing here. So I'll try to reflect them as well as I can, but their story is slightly different than mine too, So
yeah, that's a good point.
Absolutely.
Aubrey,
go ahead.
I love your point about staying open to truths that can bless your life. And there's a phrase that I often keep in mind, that with the truths that we're committed to, we should be wholehearted but half sure.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
And I don't think it has to mean, you're uncertain about everything in life, but it's keeping yourself a little open to evolving or growing everything that you think you understand about the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I just pulled up the Faith Matters About page, which I think does this is sort of evolving. Like, this has had little tweaks to it here and there over the years. But I think it does a pretty good job expressing what we're about. And maybe at least we could read a few segments here. But the very first thing you'll see in bold is Faith Matters Foundation aims to create a space in which an expansive, radiant approach to the restored gospel can be considered and discussed. I think that is what I feel like this is all about, and we haven't even talked about that phrase, creating a space. But I will say, like, some of the most meaningful feedback that I feel like we've gotten in podcast reviews or in personal messages or whatever. And by the way, just shout out, thank you everyone that has ever written a review on the podcast or left a rating. I know that's like our call out every single time we finish a podcast, but it really does. I mean, from a practical perspective, it definitely helps just more people know about it and know what we're about, but also it keeps us going, like, in a lot of ways. So thank you.
It's really super rewarding to read those. I mean, like, and maybe we'll get to that, but the effect, really, like, there's the effect that we're having is what's really important, right? So ultimately, what effect is this having on the community of believers, on the world? So maybe we'll come back to that. But go ahead.
Totally. What I was going to say is that it is really meaningful to me, and I've read several that have said that they have felt like we've helped create a space. Mm-hmm. There are, for whatever reason, and we've felt this way too, but like, people at various times in their life, it's very easy to feel marginalized or squeezed culturally or whatever, and feel like there's not space. And to the extent Faith Matters can help with that, that's something that is really meaningful to me. The other part of this page that, man, is really awesome is this B.H. Roberts quote. Do you think we should?
Yeah, let's read that. I love it. Yeah, this has been part of our mission statement from day one.
And every time I read it, it's just like, that's it right there. Okay, so he said, "I believe Mormonism," and that's in quotes, affords opportunity for thoughtful disciples who will not be content with merely repeating some of its truths, but will develop its truths. The prophet planted the germ truths of the great dispensation of the fullness of times. The disciples of Mormonism, growing discontented with the necessarily primitive methods which have hitherto prevailed in sustaining the doctrine, will yet take profounder and broader views of the great doctrines committed to the church, and, departing from mere repetition, will cast them in new formulas, until they help to give to the truths received a more forceful expression and carry it beyond the earlier and cruder stages of its development.
Yeah, I love that. And so what we really did, I think at Faith Matters, in starting Faith Matters, we went out, we were aware, we'd become aware of these voices that were doing exactly that, right? Mm-hmm. And so we thought, can we bring them together like almost collaboratively and create something together, right? So we created an advisory board, which it's a remarkable group of people. I mean, maybe you want to, I don't know.
Let's just run through them really quick.
Yeah, Tom Christofferson, Fiona Givens, Steve Young, Darius Gray, Melissa Inouye, Terryl Givens, Patrick Mason, Phil Barlow, Thomas McConkey, Jody Moore, Mallie Bonner, MacArthur Krishna, Thomas Griffith, Jacob Hess, Charles Randall Paul, Jay Griffith, Rosalind Welch.
Yeah, and we since added like Bethany Spalding. So
yes.
This is just a remarkable group of people who are doing that exact kind of work. And so we said, well, let's bring these together and see what we can create together. And so, thank you to them because we just finished a retreat with them and it was amazing. And like
you get all those people in a room together
and good stuff happens. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And yeah, you get to see another side of them, that you may not have seen before. Terryl was interesting. So the very first person that we talked to was Phil Barlow. And Phil, for those of you who don't know Phil and his work, like he's a very quiet, amazingly wise and good soul. And he published some things that were really, really helpful to me when I was like in your situation, right? And he was at Harvard too when he was publishing most of that stuff. But he now he became the head of Mormon Studies at Utah State and is now at the Maxwell Institute at BYU. But love Phil. But
so when I was a student at Harvard Divinity School, I was there for 3 years.
Okay.
And on the stairwell to go up to my classes, almost every time there's a picture of Phil Barlow.
Oh, really?
Really?
When he was about 25, 26, standing kind of in the snow with a coat on. And I would pass by Phil, be like, that's the Latter-day Saint that preceded me.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. I love Phil. Terryl Givens, Terryl and Fiona become really good friends. We spent a lot of time together. And Terryl has a particular, you might get a particular impression of Terryl, from his public appearance or his writing, but he's really funny and he's like a lot of fun and the best storyteller I've ever been around. Someday, just get a couple of Diet Cokes in him and and wind him up and have him tell stories. This I think the community of people we put together around this has been remarkable and really, really helpful. I mean, that's a great group of people.
And they disagree. I think that was the thing that was so interesting to me. Like you get them all in the room and everybody has a wildly different opinion usually. And that's okay. Like I feel like I've learned so much from seeing them really hash something out together and be really open to changing their minds. And that's why I love just coming back to this idea that the church is community, that we are the church. Because when you think of the church as a singular person or a singular hierarchy, then the question about whether you are already in a toxic relationship is a really big deal. Like that might be the only question that you have the bandwidth to deal with. And if the church is community, then you have all of these other hard questions that you get to wrestle with and that are going to stretch and grow you. And I feel like being with these people and asking them our hardest questions has really helped us to learn how to do that. Learn how to, instead of handing our agency over to someone who's in charge, when you think of the church as your community, you really have to wrestle with every single hard question in a way that feels like it must be the purpose of life. Because what could be more important than the way that hurts, like, and the way that you have to stretch and reach and trust. It's a totally different and very complex kind of faith.
I think that we're going to see the gifts that the church, the unique gifts that the church offers the world, that our church offers the world, may not be as apparent now as I think they will be. And one of the things that one of our gifts is exactly what you just pointed out, like the ability to coexist and find brotherhood and transcend the kinds of differences that are fracturing our country right now. Like it's like a discipline, right? We show up every week and or even more often to do just this kind of work with people that we're around. And it's really, it may not have been so obvious why that's important, but it's becoming more obvious now, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that the church has given me that like discipline and exercise. When we moved to Midway, when Susan and I moved to Midway, I may have shared this story with you, but in one of the very first, it was high priest group back then, but like, elders quorum, we'd call it elders quorum now. I sat down with this new group of members and I was just like kind of feeling out the room and seeing like who's in here. And there's one fellow that made a comment, and I heard his comment and immediately thought, okay, well, he and I are probably not ever going to be like great friends. Like his worldview is different than mine, and then this is what the church does, right? So at the end, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, we have 4 cannery assignments to fulfill this week, and of course this guy's hand shot up. It was his first hand, and I'm like, okay, well then I'm in too, right? So that meant that and I knew as soon as I raised my hand, that means we ride down together, down to the valley, and then we work together, and let's see what happens. So, I found this is such a dear person, and he and I will never agree probably on politics and certain things, but we're like forever friends. I love this guy, and we need to, and that's like taught me to. It's almost like when somebody has a certain flag up, instead of like letting me feel like that comes between me and them, I want to actually go talk to that person. And I want to because my experience is like when you can actually have a conversation, you can transcend these differences, the ones that we've created these differences, and they're dividing us more and more. I mean, it's one way of many ways that I think that the church is going to really bless. What we're doing is really going to bless the world.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we try to do. Like even in our advisory board, like lots of different philosophies and opinions come together, and it's just like, it's fascinating. I love it.
And I think some of the most meaningful episodes have been when we've been talking about topics that may easily be really divisive. They're the ones that feel like we're tiptoeing and they're really hard to talk about. I think those end up being the most meaningful, even if we're wrong. Like even if we miss the mark, I think it feels so good to and so hard to just get in the mess of the conversation and say something, without coming down with an opinion that you're gonna defend till you die. It's hard to have a conversation when you haven't formed an opinion yet and you're trying to understand. Like that's hard to do out loud because you're gonna do it wrong. And we have so many advisors and guests who've been willing to do that, to come on and say the thing they're thinking about but aren't sure about, and be willing to just talk about it and think about it more and open up instead of really dig in and defend the thing that they have decided.
Yeah.
I think that's one reason why we've had such a positive response, especially with you two as hosts. I think we have a lot of people who listen to every episode, even if they're not interested in that episode's topic, but because they feel a spirit of love and curiosity and honest exploration that feels very, very not only safe, but empowering of each person to explore truth for themselves.
That's so kind.
That's very kind. Yeah.
I hope that when we left off talking about how Faith Matters is trying to create this space, like that to me is the space that I was so hungry for. It was that was like the Sunday school class that's much smaller, where you can where it's really okay to open up and ask a question that's really on your mind.
Yeah. sorry.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't wanna cut you
that's
off,
it.
but
That's what I hope we are doing.
I think there comes a time in most people's lives at some point where they're tired of hearing answers, and just like having whatever it is handed to them on a silver platter, and exploration.
Yeah, I don't think that's why we're here.
Yeah, exploration becomes much more interesting.
Yeah.
And I hope people get that sense from us too, that we're not coming into this space thinking that we have the answers, and we're gonna show people that consume the content, or we're gonna show the church or anybody, the way to do it. It is an exploration. It does come from a true place of curiosity.
And I love that we're engaging people outside of our tradition too. One of our founding principles is that, and this is back when we wrote this was okay to say this, Mormonism is not about Mormonism, right? That's not what, but we can really make it that. We can spend all of our time thinking about who we are and dissecting it, and like, it was never about that. It's always been about transformation. And if it's not, like right now, if the four of us didn't feel like we were being transformed by our experience in this, like with Faith Matters and with the faith itself, would we still be doing it? Like, I feel like and the thing about our faith is it's not just about personal transformation. It's about like this communal transformation, the really hard thing, right? And yeah, I think that we really can reach out. We're at a point in the history of the world now where we can reach out and learn things, not just engage things, but actually learn from other traditions and other people. There's like this really rich thing. This is needs to be part of our DNA. But if we're always focused in on Mormonism as Mormonism, we'll never get that. And so I think this is what you guys do beautifully. I love that. I love the way you do it. I love that. And it's an earnest enterprise, right? So we're more and more, we are engaging people from outside our faith. Zach being in Boston, that like opens up a whole new world. This is really fun. And we've already had some great results from that. It's going to be fun to see. Zach's going to stay in Boston. We need an East Coast presence. I think the other thing about Faith Matters is like really important. It's not just there are different ways of knowing things. Mm-hmm. And somehow we privilege like smart people. We mm-hmm. privilege rational discourse over but our faith has never done that, right? Yeah, there's this balance between intellectual kind of rational engagement and intuitive spiritual engagement that, like, I think we're trying to strike at Faith Matters too. It's really, we started this one of our very earliest engagements was with Thomas McConkie, and Thomas became my teacher. He taught me meditation, and he has a great deal to say about how we develop as human beings and even institutions. But that component of learning how to contemplate, how to meditate, like, became really nourishing for me, really, really helpful. And so one of the many things that we're trying to do is, like, we need to give space for a contemplative tradition to emerge in our faith, right? And so we've tried to do that. Like, that's been one of the things that we do. I don't know, is anybody else doing that? Like, that is one of the things we do. And I think the world needs that. Like, right now, we need that as a people. If there was ever a time when we need to get out of our heads, so we need to be careful, like, as a Faith Matters team, not to be in our heads too much. Isn't that, like, that's always been my problem. That's always been my issue. I don't know how about you. I don't know you guys, but, like, that's it.
Yeah.
And we have, like, this really rich embodied theology, and why are we getting lost in our heads? And everyone is. Like, this is the scourge of our generation.
Well, and I think with anything else, it's not a matter of leaving your head behind either. It's the non-dualistic approach, because I think the danger in any organization, if you leave your head behind totally, is the end result of that is probably a cult, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need to bring. I mean, and I think Thomas would say it's mind and heart and body.
Of course.
I'm not necessarily the best to even describe what the difference between heart and body are, but I know that I have felt deeply in this work that there is something far beyond the rational mind that's a very important way of knowing. But at the same time, we don't try to leave the mind behind.
Yeah. But how many times have you accused yourself of, gosh, I'm too lost in my heart right now?
Right. No, the pendulum has
it
swung.
very seldom happens.
Yeah.
And right.
I think something that really emerged early on in this crisis of faith was just this the idea of faith development became really important because I just didn't even have language for the experience. And I think there's a stage where you the pendulum swings so far and the only thing that you will count is what comes from your mind. You start only believing experiences that you can prove. And there's this, I think over time you sort of start reintegrating that part of yourself. And I think there's a stage where you really do kind of have to dig in and you deal with the messy facts and you kind of lose that part of yourself for a little bit, but then there's this really beautiful reintegration. And I hope that's what we're modeling, that all of those pieces are part of you and all of those pieces bring you to God. But I think it's developmental. Like there are definitely stages where some of those things seemed valueless and I couldn't see it any other way, but you grow through that. And I feel like these guests have really helped show me how to do that.
Yeah.
I found that really helpful too, Aubrey. You hear it often with people going through a faith crisis, and I think I felt the same thing too, that you wish you could go back to believing the way you used to. Go back to that sense of certainty.
Yeah.
But I think Faith Matters, a lot of the Faith Matters conversations have shown me and made it more clear, just like with you, that you want to go forward. You want to go forward to growth, forward to more love, more joy, more understanding, more life. And I think that framework has been really helpful. And I see that as part of our role, is providing resources for people who understand that faith is a journey. Mm-hmm. It is not an either or thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tell me what you think of this. I also think that we're reaching the end of a secular age, where secularism meant it was the standard by which you.
The new atheists are no longer new.
Isn't it funny? I was thinking of the new atheists. Like a couple of them are dead. Well, you got like, but you've got
Hitchens, Dawkins.
You got Hitchens
Tinker,
dead. Is Dennis still around? He's still around.
Yeah.
Okay, so nobody's listening to Dawkins anymore. He's like,
he's just complaining on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. That's
like the rest of us.
Like the rest. And then they got Sam Harris has now become a spiritual guru, right? He's founded a whole, like, what is it called? I'm actually a subscriber, so I should know.
Waking Up?
Yeah, Waking Up, the whole Waking Up thing. So he's finding spirituality and basically admitting the secular enterprise ends up in death. It ends up in this flat world. And we actually need an enchanted world. Like even science tells us the world is much stranger fundamentally than we can imagine that it is. Like we think that this interface that we enjoy of space-time, the way that our brains perceive the world, we think that's reality. And like scientists already know that's not reality. We're only seeing a small section of it. So why can't we imagine that things are much stranger than we? Why can't we realize that things are stranger than we imagine? That's why I was so fascinated when you were interviewing Noah Feldman, you and Terryl, and there's like, if there's anyone, like he's the most brilliant of the brilliant, right? Even at Harvard, he's like he's a step above, and he's kind of come to that same place in his life. You can feel that, right? And he was raised a modern Orthodox Jew. And he's like, and as we're exploring, like, what does our faith? He's very familiar with Mormonism. What does our faith offer? And he's like, well, like an enchanted worldview for one thing. Mm. There are more people that believe in angels now in the world than ever before. So secularity has already turned the corner, right? I love that about our faith. I love that we believe actually things that are hard to believe, right? And they've produced these fruits, and you're like, okay. So I'm fascinated by that, and I love that that we're trying to strike that balance. Yeah.
Should we move into sort of from a very practical perspective where Faith Matters is going from here. People, if they were listening to this, obviously know about the podcast. We published 4 books, which is exciting. More to come. A couple that I think all of us are very excited about. We've published a course.
The long-awaited Thomas McConkie
Yes.
book, which is fantastic, and then Jennifer Finlayson-Fife's writing one as we speak, and
Yes,
on a super interesting subject. So yeah,
totally. We've published 1 course as well, Transformations of Faith, with more to come.
yeah.
Literally more to come.
Yeah.
Which by the way, like I happen to think is like one of the greatest things we've done.
Transformations
Transformations of Faith. That course,
it's remarkable.
But a lot of time I've spent like silent retreats using that material, and it's transformational. I love what we've done there. Yeah. Very proud of that.
Well, and for me, reading Patrick Mason's restoration book was one of the big pieces. This is a remarkable organization. This book is so short and so powerful.
Yeah.
Totally.
Terryl and Fiona's book, All Things New, basically, examining our vocabulary and say what we need to enrich. That's what B.H. Roberts is saying here. Let's take these ideas and develop them, and that's what they did in that book. Is our publishing efforts, like, it's kind of funny. People just assume that if we publish it, it must be our view, right? Mm-hmm. Which is not necessarily the case. I think the ideas, the core ideas behind the books that we published, are really important to throw into the discussion. Are super important. The latest book, Catherine Sontag's book, for example, she lays out this in this very beautiful, almost poetic way, like this very provocative idea about our Divine Mother and how we can experience that in our lives. But they're also meant to be disruptive. Like, these books they're not meant to make us comfortable. Like a religion, I love who was it that said, like, religion exists to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. Yeah. And I think there will always be something in we do that challenges us, right? So we don't expect everybody to agree with with what's written in these books, but we feel like they're really important topics to throw into the universe. So I'm really proud of everything we've done on that front. Yeah, and they've done well. They've been so well received. It's been exciting. Yeah.
This raises a point that we spoke about earlier, but there's a danger in being a centrist organization, which is that you don't ever make your own choices. You just calibrate yourself between the poles.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And some people have asked me, oh, you guys are pretty centrist. And I said, well, it depends. And I think on some topics, there's been an admirable boldness and audacity that I've seen. There's been an admirable boldness in the willingness to press forward on some topics. So I think with Heavenly Mother, Faith Matters has been so, supportive of making sure that we all do develop a mother tongue. And I think that shows that we are not just trying to be comfortable and safe. We're going forward in the ways that we think are important.
Yeah. Occasionally we get feedback that like a particular guest is like, why did you have them on your show? Like if there's some orthodoxy test that a guest needs to meet to come into conversation with us. We don't have those. If they have an important perspective, like, we're going to engage that topic.
One interesting thing too is that on the most potentially divisive conversations, we almost always get criticized for the same thing from opposite sides. Yeah. And which is interesting because that's very uncomfortable for me, but it's in some ways kind of reassuring. Like, we're in the middle of something that's really hard, and so there are people who will feel up in arms for the same reason that someone on the other side of the aisle will feel up in arms, and usually it happens in the same conversations. And so I know that's what we're accepting is going to happen when we get in the middle of these things. But I think it's important to challenge ourselves to being open to someone sitting across the table from you and saying something that you really disagree with and trying to figure out why. Because over and over and over again, we've left feeling like we understand each other in a way that I can completely respect. Yeah. Like, even if there's still like real disagreement, I feel like I totally respect where they're coming from. And I think it's helpful to have this imaginary audience watching a conversation because you listen to yourself and you think about, how you're responding, and if you're actually listening, or are you talking over the person, and like that's a temptation. So it's helpful to have this, to know that someone is going to hear how you're actually listening and digesting and like conversing with someone that is saying something challenging. But it's been such a beautiful practice to realize that like almost every time you leave with just so much respect, and with this realization that you really have the same values. Like they're showing up differently, but like you are rooted in the same values, and there's nothing, you don't need any qualifiers about respecting that.
Yeah, and you two have a gift for having those kinds of conversations. And can I just say, like, I'm so thrilled that the three of you are very much a part of everything we do. Actually, you do almost all of it. And
I don't know about that.
Yeah, we have a really good team. Yeah. But I just figure, like, if our religion can't continue to engage people like you, who I consider the best and the brightest, and I mean best in ways like you're just deeply good people, and brightest not only intellectually but like the spirit that comes from you. Like if we can't like keep people like you engaged, then we have a problem. So, but yeah, it's just, just associating with you and getting to, like, we send each other lots of texts and we have lots of conversations. It's just really fun. And we want to create that community, like on a large scale, because it feels great, which is like one of the reasons why it's going to be nice to be able to gather. One of the things we've always wanted to do. In fact, the very first thing that the Faith Matters did is at Utah State University, we did this conference. We sponsored this conference on translation, right? It was like this word of translation, which we've always thought meant this. It actually could mean this. And hundreds of people showed up, like 500-600 people. And we had we had Richard Bushman, and we had Terryl Givens and Patrick and Rosalind Welch, and can't remember, like we had this great group of people to come together around that. And so gathering, like it felt good to be able to talk talk that way. So and then that got disrupted with COVID, and we weren't able to execute on that portion of what we wanted to do. So we're excited to start doing that.
Yeah. Zach, do you want to fill in some details maybe on the most exciting gathering that we have coming up?
I think
should we go there?
You should talk about Restore, Bill.
I should. Haven't I? I think I've spoken plenty. Yeah, this is. We're going to have an event on October 7th and 8th, and we hope everybody can come and bring their friends, family, everyone, because this is going to be like a community experience. We're going to be asking like some of the most interesting questions and bringing some of the best minds together to discuss those questions. Some of them will be challenging. A lot of it will just be inspiring. We're gonna have a lot of music. And by the way, it's not like, don't envision a panel discussion and a bunch of, like scholars discussing. It'll be much more conversational, and you'll get to meet some of the greatest minds and souls that our community has, and then just meet other people that are super interesting. So we've been wanting to do this for a long time, and we're going to have it in Salt Lake City on October 7th and 8th. That's do you want to talk about like some of the people who are going to be involved in this?
Yeah, incredibly exciting. Some of, I think, everybody's favorites. Thomas McConkie is going to speak to us and lead us in a guided meditation.
Brian McLaren.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's coming in.
Terryl and Fiona.
Patrick. Most of our favorites. Not everybody, but just about all the favorites.
And Carolyn Pearson too.
Yeah. Mally Bonner.
Mally's going to be a big part of it, and he's bringing his whole family to sing, the Bonner family. And
the Unity Gospel Choir.
Yeah. So we're going to have some like this. This is going to be your break from Protestant sit on your hands hymns. Like we get plenty of that every week, so we're going to like mix it up a little bit.
And I would just say we love our listeners. You are what sustain us, the chance to be in the same building with you is incredibly exciting for us.
Yeah.
I think maybe one of the things that Tim and I at least hear more than anything else is people will reach out often and just say they feel really isolated in their ward or whatever their community looks like. They feel like they're the only one asking these questions. And I don't think that's true, but I know that I know how that feels. And I mean, we feel that way. I love hearing from listeners because it's really rejuvenating to feel connected with someone who's resonating with your same questions. And so I hope that gathering will actually really just be I think it brings a lot of peace to just literally be sitting in the same room with people who are thinking about and talking about the things that feel most important to you. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
For that part. Like it gives you such a sense of belonging to just be with someone.
Yeah.
So you can learn more and register by going to Faith Matters website, faithmatters.org/restore. I think I'd also really like to share one more initiative that's exciting.
By all means.
And that is that Faith Matters is going to be launching a publication where we can have writing and art from writers that can inspire and nourish. It's going to be called Radiant. And we're also going to launch it at Restore at the conference in October. But you can go ahead and sign up and learn a little bit more at radiantmagazine.org.
It's very exciting.
Awesome.
I think I've been just very encouraged by the response that we've been getting from people, and we get a lot of responses. And you know, I don't think we've yet to get one that says, "Thanks to you, like I'm disengaging with my relationship with Christ and the gospel and the church." You know, what we get is like almost entirely the opposite, and lots of messages. I don't know if like maybe we actually compiled a bunch of them, and I was reading through them like, man, this is really having a powerful and positive effect. And if it's not, we're not hearing about it. So maybe, but it's like super rewarding. If I feel like if we weren't getting that kind of response from people, and then I would rather be playing more golf because I don't get to golf a lot. And
something in this last interview that we had with Thomas McConkie, he said a lot of people, and we hear this a lot too, they come to him with this idea that, you know, you were born into this tradition, and so you have a responsibility to get out there and see what else you're missing. Anybody who just showed, you know, who didn't choose Mormonism, you got to go figure out what you're missing. And he said, you know, what if we entertained the opposite truth? Like, what if you have a responsibility to this tradition because you were born into it, because the power of your own ancestry is flowing through you, and it is your native tongue. And so if you're not going to help it become its best self and help this restoration forward, then who else will? And that that felt to me like a religious experience when he said that. I really feel that, like, we're here because it is our mother tongue, and like it's okay for that to be the reason all by itself sometimes. Like, this is just where I was planted. And
we're not the only project God has going on in the world. Like, God is doing amazing things elsewhere. Did you see the Webb telescope the other day? Sending back images, unbelievable. Like, we're seeing 13 billion years, like these amazing pictures of 13 billion years back in time. And like that whole project, that's God's project too, right? Like, we have like a project that I think is super important, but it's not God's only project. We really need to partner. When we talk about like fixed foot and searching foot, like, let's expand that, not only in what we can learn from other people, but how we can partner with people. We have big problems in the world, and it sometimes can be a little despairing, and we can't even come close to doing any of it ourselves. So, but I love the way you express that, for sure.
And I think that part of that responsibility looks like talking about our own little problems too, because when you feel defensive, you can't even look outside. Like, you're too defensive to take any good from outside of your own community, because you feel like what you have might be taken away. And so I think once you acclimate to the idea that like you can have your own problems and there are beautiful things here, it doesn't have to always be either or, because that's, I think, what it feels like in the beginning, that like you might have to give it all away if this isn't as perfect as you thought it was. Once you get used to this idea that like there's ugly stuff and there are good fruits, and we can pick out what's beautiful and make something more beautiful out of that, then it just, you lower the drawbridge, like Patrick says, and you start letting in all of the beautiful things from outside of your tradition. It's okay to like widen that searching foot. And
sometimes acknowledging the problems that you're experiencing in your own community can actually unite you in a weird way with others. Because like with Brian McLaren, for example, when he came on and shared his experience about what life is like these days in evangelical Christianity, it's like, man, like these are human issues.
Absolutely.
You know, and we have our own expressions of them within each tradition. But like everyone that's at least within this specific topic, you know, everyone that's living a life of faith to some extent is experiencing the same things we're experiencing in the Latter-day Saint tradition. Yeah. And
I see God's fingerprints and human fingerprints.
Yes.
About in equal proportions, sometimes a little more of the, one than the other, shot through everything that we've, everything about our religion and everything about our tradition. It's that's the way it's supposed to be. I actually embrace that. Like, we've made big mistakes, and we'll probably make more, but we're doing something. Like, we're builders, we take risks and we have faith, and we kind of think about these things that seem unreasonable. We believe these things that are unreasonable and act in the world and try to, I love that about faith in general.
We build temples on swamps.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Bill.
I like being builders. Like,
yeah.
I love building something. Hopefully we're building something here that's really useful.
Go ahead.
I mean, sitting back and being critics, that's like the easy way out, and so.
Yeah. That's exactly what
I really liked what you were saying, Aubrey, about becoming whole enough to then be open. And what draws me so much to our mission and our work is the calling to help heal people. That Jesus heals people, and we need to help extend Jesus's love and healing power. And I think it's important that through the work that we do, we help heal people in their relationship with God and with the church, and then they can be agents of healing.
Yeah. And I love that, because there was a review recently that meant so much to me, and it said it was very kind, but there was one part that said there's no stone throwing here, and that means a lot, because I think part of healing is diagnosing a problem. Like, you have to be honest about an infection. Like, you have to be honest about what's going on, but it's so much easier to just point out all of the problems and move on. And I hope that what we're doing goes beyond that.
Can I just read that, because you actually texted it to me? This little review, it says,
really like this review.
Yeah, it's a great one. Well, it's the most recent one, I think. So it just happens to be. But he says, faith matters is the standard that sets the standard. So that's a little overstatement. No other podcast does more to engage questions surrounding the LDS faith with nuance, rigor, compassion, and love. The hosts have jumped into virtually every difficult and controversial issue, and critically, they refuse to accept easy answers when such answers do not present themselves. And somehow they do it all with grace, humor, and kindness. They allow just as much space for church leaders as they do for other guests. No stone throwing here. This is instead the very best of us, wrestling hard ideas and accepting when they are hard. That's pretty good.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That's cool.
I appreciated that.
And again, just like everyone that's written those kind things to us, thank you so much. We read every single one.
This is a passion project, not a paid gig.
Yes.
Oh,
we should emphasize. Really this has been all volunteer effort from everybody on the board. Zach, excitingly, is our very first full-time hire. And so,
not only that, but everyone sitting at this table has given substantial resources to this effort. So not only time, but money. So so just thank you, Tim and Aubrey, for doing what you're doing and becoming so good at it. And Zach, our first it's time to professionalize this organization.
Hard to imagine it being any more than it already is.
No, we're so excited to have Zach. The background that he brings, both philosophically, but also the expertise that you have in media, it just was a perfect fit. And when you first came to our board meeting and just sat down with us, I think there was an immediate sort of unanimity, like we need to get Zach involved, and we couldn't be more excited to have you.
And happened at exactly the right time, and which seems to happen, right?
Yeah.
So we're just welcome aboard, man.
So happy, so joyful to be a part of this wonderful mission.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just say to close. When I was in business school, Mitt Romney came to one of my classes, and I was like really struggling trying to figure out what my career was going to look like. It was getting close to graduation, and I actually got the chance to ask him, like, what do you think? And he said he's always guided his career on two things: make sure and number one was make sure you're working on something interesting and do it with, and number two was do it with people you like. And I definitely think we're meeting those two. So I just want to say, love you guys.
If that ever changes.
Aubrey, love you the most. Love you guys too. But it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's going to be fun to see what comes out of this.
All right, thanks so much to each of you for tuning into this conversation. We hope that it was helpful, and as always, we want to thank you for your support of Faith Matters. Registration for the Restore Conference is now open, like we mentioned in the episode, so head to faithmatters.org/restore to purchase tickets. And please feel free to share it with your friends and family. We think that this gathering will be really special, and we would love to have as many people participate as possible. Thanks as always for listening, and remember that you can check out more at faithmatters.org.